Marika Chandler, who has been working with Outward Bound Canada, or OBC, for the past 4 years as the Ontario Director. It's been an exciting role to work within a not-for-profit organization, ensuring everyone has access to both short and extended wilderness expeditions, to build community, and to see students learn just how much grit they indeed have. Marika has worked with the not-for-profit industry for years, paddling along rivers with Boundless Adventures, building recreation programs for the homeless in Edmonton, supervising Girl Guide camps in Ontario, and now with OBC. Initially, after her undergraduate degree, she had a brief career in the healthcare industry where she longed to be back outdoors where her first jobs had been. She went back to school, graduated from Queen's University Outdoor and Experiential Education program, and hasn't looked back since then from shifting gears. Marika sits on the Fleming College Outdoor Adventure Program Advisory Council, has presented at conferences such as COEO and the Outdoor Collective, and has participated in international Outward Bound events. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, Marika.
So yes, I mean, I'm here. I'm really excited and thankful for the invitation to be here. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about, or two of the things I'm going to talk about, is the positive impact that spending time in nature has on our mental health, and what can be done about reducing barriers to access. So two connected topics, and just really excited to share some thoughts with you. I think it's important to note that I'm not a mental health expert, though my work has taken me to a lot of organizations that work with people with differing mental health challenges, which I'm going to get into a little bit here. I'm going to presume that you can see my screen and let me know if that's not the case. So first of all, I just want to pose a question to everybody. When is, and just think about this on your own, when is the last time that you purposefully participated in an activity to improve your physical health? And think of how often you might do that. And now I want you to think of the last time that you purposefully sought out an activity for your mental health. I'm willing to bet that they're not the same amount of times that you do that. You know, our society is focused on health and fitness in a whole number of ways. And while we see the rise in yoga and mindfulness, we don't think of our mental health in the same manner as we think of our physical health. And yet it is something that we do need to exercise in a similar way and spend time working on it. We've seen during the last number of months of COVID that people are just going in droves to outdoor spaces. You know, the City of Toronto released a report saying how exponential the growth of people visiting the city parks has been. The Ontario park system has been the same. Algonquin Park and the other parks have indicated upwards of a 30% increase in access this year, which is just incredible. And, you know, I'd like to think that that's our innate sense of seeking out nature for calm. We're in a really uncertain time, and our access to a lot of things has been restricted, and yet our access to the outdoors is off the charts. I know I needed to get my bike tuned up early in the spring, and there were no parts, and I know people who are trying to buy bikes. So we're all familiar with these stories about how COVID has really pushed people into those outdoor spaces, which is really, really wonderful in so many ways. Not to say it doesn't come with added challenges, of course. But the add-on to that is evidence shows really clearly that habits that we set in childhood have a profound impact on what we do as adults. So having positive adult role models is really key to building lasting relationships and connections with nature and with activity. And if we don't do that, we should imagine then what is the opposite. If we aren't being those role models who are engaging people outside, what is the future hold for those youth that aren't setting those habits if we know that they're not going to get carried into adulthood? I've spent time leading trips with youth and with adults, and inevitably when you work with adults, you know, it's almost a direct quote every time is someone will say, oh, I remember I have a childhood memory of when I went fishing with my grandfather, or when I went running through a creek with my sibling, or when I climbed a tree. And it's really clear when you work with adults how powerful those connections that they had with nature are, and what an impact it might have had on them. There's no mystery as to the benefits of spending time in nature. A quick Google search just churns up thousands of reports. There's lots of academic studies that talk about all of the benefits, but they include everything from decreasing stress, decreasing depression, decreasing anxiety, improving work performance in academics, improving your social relationships, even at the biochemical level, you know, increasing your serotonin. And it's just really incredible how well articulated that is. And you know, the positive impacts just are so innumerable that, you know, we should all be spending time outside, which again, is just great why so many people have been during COVID. There's a really simple study that demonstrates, I think, just the simplicity of how nature can impact our health and wellness. And that's, it was a study done on an apartment building, and people on one side of the building had a view of green space and trees, and people on the other side did not. It was concrete. And what they found was all of those benefits that I described, including in this case, a decrease in violence on the side that faced nature. So it's really incredible the impact that even just being able to see a tree out your window. And I know during the early lockdown, I had a number of conversations with people about, you know, what is that view that you have, or what is that space that you're living in, and how is that impacting you? Now, I think one of the reasons that spending time in nature really impacts our sense of self-worth and self-esteem is that it gives us the opportunity to practice mastery. You know, nature is a really wonderful teacher. As the introduction said, I went to Teachers College, and, you know, now as an employer, you know, we give people feedback, and feedback is really great, but sometimes nature is actually the best thing to give you feedback. It's direct and it's immediate. And, you know, when I was thinking of this talk, I was thinking in particular about a number of students that I've had the joy of working with or meeting. And there's one story I'm going to share that I think highlights this really well. And it's a story about a young woman who came on a winter expedition a couple of years ago with Outward Bound. And she was out with her group, and we have the students stay in a warm, heated prospector tent, which is changing in the times of COVID, of course, but they teach the students how to use a saw, how to use an axe, how to identify great wood for harvesting. And so the students have the process of, you know, getting the wood in its raw form, and, you know, putting all the sweat equity into getting it back to the tent, and then lighting the fire and cooking your dinner. And this student was describing this process, and what's important to know is that what was going on in her life before she went on this expedition is she'd immigrated to Canada with her family from Iran. It was a really large family. Her dad had a disability and was really struggling as a new Canadian, trying to find their way as a family and as the head of a family. And unfortunately, he had passed away months before she had the opportunity to come on this expedition with her school group. And so you can imagine she was not the happiest of students. She was struggling with depression. She was having quite a hard time in a big family that just lost its father figure, trying to figure out her own path. And on the expedition, afterwards she was reflecting, and she was describing this process of learning to harvest the wood, and, you know, learning to start a fire and learning to cook over that fire. And she said that it really had the realization for her, and this is her direct quote, "If I can start a fire, I can start my life." And, you know, I've heard her speak a few times about this, and it's just, I can't, you know, I choke back the tears even now every time she says that, because it's just really incredible how direct that experience that she had in nature, how she's able to really relate that to taking steps forward in her life. And I'm really happy to say, you know, she has gone on to university. She's doing some really interesting things, studying international development studies. So there's one example of just an impact on a particular person. So I think, that's a great segue into, you know, if we absolutely know that spending time in nature has all of these benefits, then we should be really diligent and really careful about making sure that everybody has access to do it. And there's a few reports coming out about the impact of COVID on youth. And, there's been lots of media stories, as I'm sure we all know, either firsthand or through reading the news, just, the uncertain world that we're in, the academic stress on students, the uncertainty over virtual learning, in-person learning, the threat of the virus, and all of those things, that is taking a toll on the mental health of youth across the country. And just to highlight that fact, jack.org, which is a youth mental health organization, they release a report every year called the Youth Voice Report. And this year they've reported a shift in the amount of youth contemplating suicide has gone from 8% last year to 18% in 2020. That's a 10% increase. And that increase is more stark when you look at marginalized populations, when you look at Indigenous youth, when you look at LGBTQ2S youth. That has a greater impact on those populations. Now, in line with that, which I find really interesting, is that Participaction also releases a report card every year for youth's activity levels. And it's almost the complete opposite. So where we're seeing a spike in suicide contemplation, we're seeing a total decline in physical activity. For youth between 12 and 17, the number of youth who are reaching kind of the 24-hour goal of activity, it's only 0.8%, 0.8. And if we know, as I've already talked about, one way to form habits as an adult is to have those opportunities as a youth. So right now we're seeing that habit in youth entirely plummet, and the percentage change is 10% down. So in youth younger than 12, it's gone from 15% to 4%. So it is the complete opposite of that jack.org stat. The barriers to getting outdoors are innumerable. And in fact, Outward Bound over the last 50 years has inched closer to, in Ontario at least, because we are national, we've inched closer to Toronto. And one of the reasons for that is to improve access, to the point that 10 years ago, we opened a center in Toronto so that we could have youth right here in the city accessing the green spaces. And if anybody knows David Sobel, who's an education philosopher, he talks a lot about place-based education and the need to make those connections, not always in a far off, distant, remote expedition sense, but also in your own backyard. And I shared some photos at the beginning from those experiences. But the barriers, I mean, they include anything from financial, including transportation, which Park Bus tries to help address in providing cheaper transportation to our provincial parks, but also, the equipment, the perception that you have to be wearing a fancy Arc'teryx jacket or have the top of the line gear. There's also language barriers, and there's some terrible stories this year of incidents that have happened in parks, in part because of language barriers that have happened. Physical abilities is another barrier, but there's also the barriers of time, which is related to what job you might be employed in, and there's also the barrier of safety. And not all marginalized communities have a history of feeling safe in those spaces. So it's really important as an industry and as an organization that we really help to reduce those barriers for all of the mental health reasons that I've already named. And at Outward Bound last year, we supported 45% of all of our students were supported financially to go out on an expedition. And that could have been anything from a 5-day expedition to, we have a 32-day expedition. And the Ontario Camp Association also has a great number of camps that offer bursaries to youth to attend camp. And I know in Jack's intro, you heard about the work that he does as well to help address this. And I think, even as individuals, there's a lot of ways that you can seek out funding for your own opportunities or those that you know. I think that, if we can help get more youth outside and help be those positive role models who are creating those habits early on, then we're going to continue to have an impact on the mental health of not only individuals, but on a population. And I think now, even though we're seeing that rise in recreation that's happening, I think that this is really a key thing, because we do know that youth are facing unprecedented challenges that haven't been here before. So be that positive role model, find a youth, get them outside. I think that's the most important thing kind of to take away from all of this. Thanks very much.
But environmental health is becoming the first aid of yesterday.